So we're going to get right into our first agenda item, and that is a panel that we've invited. Voices of Survivors Upholding Indigenous Laws in the Search and Recovery of Missing Children. So we have three panelists. What we've done is we've asked them to speak, and I know this is going to be difficult, and I know that as part of this gathering, the focus is on Indigenous laws. And unfortunately, I've sort of dealt with this, but I'm going to break one of my own laws right off the bat. I'm going to minimize or ask that the speakers limit to 20 minutes. I know my teaching is that you listen to an elder as long as they speak. You cannot cut off an elder. But I do recognize the panelists who I have much respect for, and I would, in any other world, not limit anybody to 20 minutes. But we've had the discussion. We do have an hour to go through this topic. Each of the speakers has 20 minutes. We're going to invite them to stay, and to stay for the morning, and then we're going to open it up as we talked about if you have any comments or anything to speak to regarding their presentation. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panel, the three panelists that are here. Doug George, and Doug George helped me with the pronunciation, and I probably will not get it right, so you'll have to correct me. Ganandio. Ganandio. And he explained to me that if you emphasize different parts of the words, it means different things. Completely different, so I have to make sure I get it right. We also have Pita Ertuk from Nauwat, Louis Gardner from Ile-à-la-Crosse, Saskatchewan. So we have the three panelists that will come up, again, make their presentations, and then later this morning, after the next two speakers, we will open up the floor if you have any discussion. So with that, I'm going to ask Doug George Canadio to come and make a presentation.
All right. Thank you. Does that work? Just press this. Here. Okay. Gwegwe. First, I want to acknowledge that it has been 50 years since our people took a stand against the oppression brought upon our people at Wounded Knee, South Dakota, in that because of what those primarily young people did during those 100 days enables each one of us to be here today. And the chains that bound us to the oppressive laws of the United States and Canada at Wounded Knee, those chains began to be free, to be broken. And we have to acknowledge that the sacrifices were made at Wounded Knee. Buddy Lamont, Frank Clearwater, both died in defense of the Lakota people and Indigenous people. And then later, Anna Pictou from Mi'kmaq Nation. And here in Ontario, Dudley George, and so many others who have literally given their lives in defense of their nations and of the Indigenous peoples of this country. And had they not done that, had they not given that sacrifice, that initiatives like the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People could not have happened. It was from that energy, that suffering, that pain that they went through when they gave up their lives, that enabled our delegates when they went to Geneva in 1977 and then spent the next 30 years lobbying the nations of the world, that finally got that declaration passed in 2007. And we're optimistic that Canada will soon blend that within its national legislation. So things are changing, but not without sacrifice. I'd also like to acknowledge something that took me by surprise last night, is my classmate at the Mohawk Institute, Joey Commanda from the Algonquin Nation. He was the last victim of the Mohawk Institute. He died at 5 o'clock on September 3rd, 1968. He was our good friend, and when he found out that the Mohawks of Akwesasne, for the first and only time in the history of residential schools of Canada, collectively were expelled from an institution, When he found out that our Akwesasne people, our boys, were not there to protect him, he ran, just said we had won. He got as far as Toronto from Brantford, where he was hit by a commuter train a little bit after 5 in the evening. And because of his sacrifice, because of what that 4'10", 90-pound boy suffered at the moment in which he made his journey into the spirit world, the Mohawk Institute was closed, and subsequently closures began to take part all across Canada. And so to acknowledge him, to rename that Sunnyside Bridge at Roncesvalles will remind every Canadian, every commuter that goes underneath that bridge about Joey Commanda. So that's a great, great thing, and it was unexpected, but I'm honored that it's going to happen. So thank you to the City of Toronto for making this. Now, one of the most fundamental things in human history occurred at October 12th on 1492 when an individual called Cristobal Colon, he was not Christopher Columbus, but Cristobal Colon from Catalonia and Barcelona, arrived on the eastern shores of one of our islands. And there he encountered a people that were not mentioned within the teachings or any of the instructions in Europe, that they were confronted with a whole new people who had an entirely different way of living. And his descriptions of those people upon initial encounter was that they lived in a condition of paradise. Paradise not in a biblical sense, but paradise that was unanticipated and unexpected. And the dilemma was what to do about this. Well, we do know what happened is that by enacting the doctrines of discovery, that the Christian nations assumed that they had a God-given right to assume control over the indigenous inhabitants of this continent. And their arrival here was made possible because they brought with them communicable diseases, where we had a population on the north part of the continent on Turtle Island, estimated anywhere from 10 to 20 million. By the year 1900, there were less than 200,000 Native people left in Canada. And for the Iroquois, for our people, who once had jurisdiction over 26 million acres of land in what is called New York and Pennsylvania, Eastern Ontario, and Southern Quebec. By the year 1900, we were reduced to 6,000 people south of the Great Lakes and an equal number north. That's how close we came to physical extinction. In the professionals in Canada, United States, the governments, the academics were labeling us at that time as a vanishing people, the vanishing Americans. And by golly, we came that close to physically disappearing. Well, 120 years later, we can now say that well over 120,000 Iroquois people today, and that we have demonstrated a miracle in that we've been able to rejuvenate not just our population, but also to preserve our heritage. And you still have our indigenous language, our Aboriginal ceremonies, our identity is still very much vibrant. And despite the best efforts of the colonial peoples, we've endured, and that in itself is a miracle. But along the way, they developed certain broad stereotypes in order to dehumanize us, in order to justify the colonization process. We know that's a necessary part of the system when you're going to suppress a people. We see it taking place in Ukraine and other nations of the world today. And one of the things they did that resonates with the residential schools is the disruption of our spiritual practices. Amongst the Mohawks, what happens is when we're given the 3 sacred breaths of life at the beginning of our time on this earth, that we have certain duties and certain obligations. And then at the conclusion of our time on this earth, that we are instructed that the physical body, once the sacred breaths leave, that physical body has to return to what they say at our morning ceremonies, the embrace of Mother Earth. And that the transition, the biological transition has to take place in accordance with the ancient rituals and the natural laws. Well, one of the first things the Europeans did, literally, when they arrived on the East Coast, the Puritans, when they came here, even though they found themselves in the land of great plenty with enormous fishing reserves and a wealth of traditional medicines and plant foods, they were starving themselves to death because they were not acclimated to our way of thinking and our technologies. And so what they did is when they got off the boats at Plymouth, and they were starving, they began to rifle through Indian burial grounds. And for the first winter, most of the nutrition came from food that our people had placed with those who had left as a burial offering. And so the desecration of our burial sites begins from there. Another factor in all of this was the myths that they perpetuated about who we were as human beings. And in order to find out what they would consider hard archaeological evidence, they began to rifle through many of our burial grounds, including some of the mounds. This is one of the mounds that was found and excavated near Thomas Jefferson's home. He was one of the most notorious persons for desecrating sacred grounds of Aboriginal people because he, like the people of his generation, his era, could not believe in the intellectual, mechanical, engineering, scientific genius of Native people. He believed that, like so many others, that we were primitive and nomadic and of very little consequence on this earth, and that surely all the things that we had accomplished in terms of architecture and the plants that we had developed, that had to come from somewhere else. And he was determined to find out where that someplace else was. And this will lead us to the residential schools. So these are the children at Carlisle. These are the ultimate victims of that type of colonialist attitude. And many of these children never made it home, and their remains are buried at Carlisle in Pennsylvania, some of which are marked, many of which are not. This kind of thing is what they would find. The Mohawks, we had different burial practices. What do we do sometimes is return people back to the earth in a fetal position, faced in a certain cardinal direction. And at certain times when we moved our villages, we would gather all the remains of those who had left, and we'd put them in a common burial ground or a mound. But as soon as the settlers arrived, not just the Puritans, but virtually every wave of these people who came to our territories. Now remember that the people who are on our territories, on the frontier, were not the best kind of people. That the Europeans had emptied their jails and put all of their political and religious dissidents on the very edge. Those people who were already prone to violence and exploitation, murder and mayhem, those were the ones that we encountered. And one of the ways they derived a living for many of them was rifling through native graves and selling the remnants on the market in Europe. So we see these things. This is in Mohawk territory where they do mark the graves, but they mark the graves as a preliminary to exploiting those graves. Now, you all know who this individual was, right? The Europeans sensed that there was something perhaps not quite right in what they were doing. There was a kind of resonance to it. So what they did with individuals like this, in order to neutralize his power, this is Geronimo, is they decapitated him once he died at Fort Sill, Oklahoma in 1912, and they brought his head over to Yale University, where it's part of the Skull and Bones Society. Many of the current senior people in positions of power in Washington, Bill Clinton, the Bushes, they're all part of the Skull and Bones Society. It's a secret, what they call a cabal, coming from Yale and Harvard and these other Ivy League schools that use the physical remains of our ancestors in order to derive great power in this reality. So they cut off his head. One of the things that possessed the colonists was this, that our people were vibrant, we were tall, we were beautiful, handsome people. Our height far exceeded that of the disease-ridden colonists. And so they were determined to try to find the remnants, the bones of our ancestors. And this is an individual who might have stood about 7 foot tall. Amongst our people, there are certain Iroquoian elements who were known for their height. One of them was the Susquehannas, who lived in eastern Pennsylvania, and they easily topped 6.5 to 7 feet tall. My wife's ancestor was one of them. The original Shenandoah was known for his height. He was the only guy in the colonies who could look down on George Washington, literally. But that was typical of who we were. And when you look at if you're an archaeologist, an anthropologist, forensic scientist, you see that these people were defined by extraordinarily good health, strong, powerful teeth, great bone structure. And I remember seeing in Albany at the New York State Museum, when we were going to repatriate some Mohawk remains, they showed us the skeletons of our ancestors, and then they showed it in contrast to European of the same era, and the differences were really remarkable and profound. But these are the things that they excavated. Even to the current day, there are still markets in the United States, subtle markets, in order to take the remains from native burial grounds and sell those things. Here again, one of the so-called intellectuals in American museology. Many of the museums in the United States still hold on to literally thousands of remains from native people, not just the physical remains, but the funerary objects as well. The pilgrims, the grave robbers, as soon as an area is identified, then these people come in and take what they will. Now, that leads us to something that I was involved with in 30 some odd years ago when the United States passed the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act in 1990, one of the last laws signed by Ronald Reagan. And what it was meant to do was to initiate a means by which human remains, native remains, could be repatriated back to their respective nations in order to restore spiritual balance. Now, I served as a trustee at a National Museum of American Indian with the late Vine Deloria, and he asked me to chair the repatriation committee for the NMAI. We made what I would call an unholy alliance with the Smithsonian, which at that point and up to this day still has a deplorable reputation for repatriating human remains. They have said that despite the federal law, they are exempt, and that they still hold on to literally thousands of native people for something called study. And Vine and I were determined that we were going to repatriate these items as fast as we could. And one of the cardinal rules of museums worldwide is that once you get something in your possession, you fight like hell to maintain it. And that the dirtiest word that they could hear is something called repatriation, when they actually have to give things back. So during my tenure, Vine and I developed a policy with the rest of the board to deaccession those things within our collection that were necessary to maintain the integrity of Native nations, that because of the spiritual disruption brought about by things like this, there had to be a balance and things had to be returned. And so we expedited that, and we began to, first we did an assessment of actually how many items we had. No one had ever done that before, and we came up with 880,000 items. Took us 5 years to move those items from a warehouse in New York to our facility in Suitland, Maryland. 5 years, 2 tractor trailers a week, uninterrupted for 5 years to get those items to where they could be protected, and we could actually inventory them and allow the information out so Native nations could come to us and say, this is my ancestor, this is what I need, this is what I need to restore my culture, my language, my politics. Because to us, what was the sense of having a museum if all it showed was items? A museum to us had to be the stimulus upon which there was this great rejuvenation of Native peoples across the Americas, and that was our sacred obligation, our sacred duty. Tecumseh, I suggested to Toronto Metropolitan University that they name the school after him. They decided not to do that. But there's still a vigorous search for his remains. He is the ancestor of my niece and my two nieces and my nephews. Their family is blended with ours. So his children wound up in Oklahoma, and then my brother-in-law was Tecumseh's great-great-great-grandfather. And where he's buried is, pardon? 2 more minutes. And here's what I have to emphasize is all of this together, the failures of the Native American Grazier Protection Act is very profound. It only applies to those institutions that receive federal funding and does not apply to some institutions like the Smithsonian. Many of the colleges and museums have found a clever way around repatriation. What we want to do and what we propose for Canada is that we form a committee of Aboriginal people. We summarize what went wrong with NAGPRA in the United States, and we pass federal legislation that applies to every individual, every corporation, museum, center of study, university, that they have to meet with us as a priority in order to establish procedures for the return of our human remains. That law has to have, unlike the one in the United States, teeth. It has to have power to enforce those laws so that when a human remain is encountered, that it will be a legal requirement for them to contact a national committee. We will then initiate a formal search of that committee, and the government will provide adequate compensation for the homeowners or the business or any other entity that fears that their property might be disrupted or somehow qualified. The reason people don't report these findings because there is a fiscal threat to their well-being. So national legislation in Canada has to address this. It has to say that Native people are priority, not just simply consultants like the United States, and that every entity in this country, individual or collective, is bound by these strict federal laws to report these findings when they happen. Then and only then can we begin the true act of reconciliation and truth. But the kids have to return to us. The remains have to come back to us. And so that's what I'm proposing, is that we create this committee. The committee has enforcement powers, and then we can affect the greater part of our reconciliation. Not reconciliation with the Canadian people or the federal government, but reconciliation with the spirits of those who were stolen from the embrace of Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug George. Canandio. Thank you, miigwech. So next I'm going to call upon Pita Ertuk. And Pita, you can either stay at your seat or come up to the podium, whatever you're comfortable with. You can speak from, you'll come up? Okay. So with that, if we can welcome Pita.
Can I use that other microphone for a minute?
Yes, I'll give you this one.
I'm going to make my speech over here.
Okay, very good.
Goeiemiddag, nekokmik. Goeie zoek te marialo ga maubanin nama. Pilgeri zoek kama ko ajiga tangin mata. Pilgeri jutiga uplume ajing yakniakman kawi maniakpasi. Thank you so much for inviting me to come to this important conference, important meeting. Some of the things that I do are very different from most presenters, only because I'm me, and also because I'm Inuk. I figured this song that I'm going to sing before I go and do my presentation is very fitting. Inuit used to make their songs of hunting, fishing, happy times, and things like that. Octave Sivaniktok, type Simanikalakolok to how you may ilai sigun. Now yang meu taulok tok 1956 year tidlugo. He was sent to the PA sanatorium, TB sanatorium, and he stayed there for 2 years, unable to speak English, but he learned to speak Cree really well when he got back to Nauyat. And he composed this song, and it goes like this, that I'm going to sing in the land of the First Nation people. Hi, how are you doing? Oh, namaktok, ubangalo. All I do nowadays is to wash and wash and wash every day. And you can imagine that you don't wash your hands or anything like that in the snow house in the Niglu. I'm going to sing, hey? Thank you.
Very good.
I'll send you the bill later. Goeiemiddag, thank you so much for inviting me. Every morning when I about to make a speech, I speak to my father. He died in 1971. He was a shaman. And I ask him to make sure that I make a good speech where everybody will understand, where everybody will be informed and be educated about my speech and the words that he used to speak to me. I was born in the Niglu and lived in the Niglu for the first 11 years of my life until I was taken by the church and the government of Canada to go to a residential school in Chesterfield Inlet. Inukturlu imgagunatiaksonga ublume, amalu inuktur okallagunatiaksonga, iksirarivanullu, amalu gavamakurnu okagumablunga sibudlakpagming. I still speak really good Inuktitut, although they said, don't ever let me hear you speak that language again in this classroom. And I still sing traditional songs pretty well. So I say to the Roman Catholic Church and the government of Canada, I still do really well, but you have failed. I came here to support you. I came here to support you with the unmarked graves, unmarked burial sites in your province, in your territory. We are grieving with you. We are sad with you. We are with you all the way. We support you all the way. That is the message that my fellow Inuit from Nunavut, from within Inuit Nunangat, wanted me to tell you. I want to also tell you that in light of what has happened, we found it overwhelming living in the Arctic. I am a survivor of residential school for 7 years at the Turketel Hall, Roman Catholic run, I found it so overwhelming to hear what has happened in the past couple of years. Wow. So as a result, I want to say to you, I love you. I'm with you. Our people in the Arctic are with you. I want to tell you a couple of stories before I go on to some of the things. There's a lady named Teresa Ukalenyuk. She's from Igloolik, where Monica Ituksaakdoot comes from. And she's also my fellow survivor of residential school. One day, back about 1960, 1962, in May, airplane come that landed on the ice in the wintertime, springtime. They landed on floats in the summertime. They were ready to take us back to our community from Chesterfield Inlet. And then Teresa and her husband in Igloolik, as always, as our parents did when we were being brought back home, they waited. They went to meet the plane. Single engine Norseman. They went to meet the plane like other parents, waiting for their child to come home. Her name was Yvonne, a little girl. They waited and waited. Yvonne never showed up. The church, the government, the nurses, the sisters, great aunts, never told them of what happened to that little girl. That little girl died, and she doesn't know to this day where she is buried. Roman Catholic Church, Government of Canada, you have to be accountable for what happened. You have a lot of responsibility for what happened, and you must be held accountable with what happened. I prefer to say I was kidnapped in broad daylight right in front of my parents when I was being taken away from our outpost camp to go to a residential school. I want to read just a few things that I said several years ago in Montreal. I want to be able to give you some understanding of what happened to us, of how we were taken away by the government. It was in 1958. I was 11 years old, and I was to attend Sir Joseph Bernier Federal Day School in Igloolik, where Lavinia Brown comes from. Chesterfield Inlet for the first time in my life. Little did my parents or I know that this was the beginning of leaving behind my culture, my language, my Inuit spirituality, my shamanism, and the practice of which we were used to for healing, special relationships among us Inuit with animals, land, our past, and the future. We were to be assimilated into the Kablunak world, to think like a European. The losses we experienced were to be permanent. The impact on all of us, for my family, my friends, and many of us who are now seen to be leaders of our people, was traumatic. Many of us have spent our lives trying in many, many different ways to bring meaning back into lives that were emptied of the ideas, beliefs, and relationships that were for thousands of years brought meaning and purpose to Inuit. Some have turned into this modern religion called Christianity. Others, like me, we are convinced that recovering, retrieving the culture we lost is essential to giving direction, not only to ourselves, but to also for future generations. After so much work that we've done, there's Jack Anaroak, who's here. He is also from Nauyat, Repulse Bay. There's late Mary Stungilik. Jack, are you here? Jack? Oh, Taika. He's here. We've done a lot of work to move forward this residential school from the impact of Sir Joseph Bernier Federal Day School. After much work and fundraising in the summer of 1993, we held at Turcotal Hall Sir Joseph Bernier Federal Day School a reunion of former students. Because we cannot easily erase the memory of the sexual, physical, mental abuses that we've suffered at the hands of the various religious groups, we have had to do something to restore our health and pride. Healing and reconciliation of our people. Healing and reconciliation of our people is taking place today. For us, for our future, our children. What happened to us at the residential school was very traumatic. We had a loss of culture, loss of language, loss of traditional beliefs such as shamanism, loss of parenting skills, and we were sexually abused by the clergy. We always felt that Canadians have a right to know of what happened to us at the residential school. Canadians have a right to know. Canadians have a duty, responsibility to know what happened to us at the residential school. Because what happened at the residential school is not only Indigenous history, but it is also a Canadian history. That is why I say to Canada, to many different parts of Canada, to many different parts of the world, that they have a right to know of what happened to us. We Indigenous people gathering here today have a responsibility. We're united in what we want to do for future. We are ever united. That's a really good thing to do. We are ever united. Look what we can do together. We have done a lot of work together for ourselves, for our past, for our future. That's what we have done to reclaim, to retrieve, and take back what we have lost at the residential school. We need to work together. And by working together, I believe that we can bring about a result which will ensure a better future for tomorrow, for many people in the world, for many people in Canada, for many people around the world. We feel for others because we actively hold to our values of connectedness and empathy. We would never want to see others in the future be overwhelmed, intimidated, devalued, isolated, or abused in any way. Never, never, ever again. Let me say this. Those of us who are attending this important conference today, yesterday, and tomorrow, out of great pain, there are lessons for all of us. Out of our suffering, there comes insight, compassion for others, and a deep resolve to move forward, treating other people with greater awareness and kindness. Out of our frustration and isolation comes a desire to acknowledge and confront, rather than avoid what is obvious and continuing to suffer in silence. Out of a deep-held Inuit belief in survival and always moving forward comes a genuine wish to reach out and help each other progress. Out of our marginalizing experience comes a profound need to connect with others, to reaffirm our own identity while respecting diversity. Out of our pain comes sensitivity to others who have suffered. Let us, my friends, ladies and gentlemen, fellow survivors, my fellow Canadians, let us then journey together to build a better world, better life. with trust, honesty, and determination. We have a duty and responsibility to have a better world for our grandchildren, their children, and their children's children. Miigwech, nakokmik, huyennamik. Thank you. Thank you.
Miigwech, thank you very much to Pita. And just a reminder, we are, I believe, on the Facebook page. We are live streaming. I just want to confirm it is the Facebook page. And I know some people are just tuning in at certain times. So again, a big thank you to Pita Ertuk from Nauyet for that presentation. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Louis Gardner from Île à la Crosse.
Merci. Tansegi o kiuta kama mo piik mihtinu te ipiapiana no sipini pauyanina. Ipetsa mustawa go isinua ninano suma a residential school saktawa. I stand before you, I guess, and for all, I want to speak for all survivors and the intergenerational people in our community in Île à Crosse, but also the surrounding communities that were members of our Île à Crosse residential school. My name is Louis Gardner. I come from the historic Métis community of Île à Crosse. Now, where's Île à Crosse? Île à Crosse is situated in northwest Saskatchewan. Northwest Saskatchewan, we're about 5 hours away from Saskatoon, north. And the history of our community, we're 247 years old. 1776 is when, and we're part of the Churchill River system. So that's the history of Île à Crosse and also the surrounding communities, and I'll speak on them a little bit more. My Indigenous language is Michif. Michif is a mixture of Cree and French. Like I said, we're 247 years old as a community. A lot of history in our community. We're along the Churchill River system. That was a highway then. There was no other form of highways. So Île à Crosse was there before Canada was a country, before Saskatchewan was a province. We're the second oldest community in Western Canada, and Cumberland House is the oldest, 2 years older than us. We were also part of I'll just give a little bit of history of our area. We were also part of the first industry in Western Canada, and that was the fur trade. Hudson's Bay Company, the Northwest Company were there, and they, and they made you can see the Hudson's Bay Company in northern stores up north. They're still alive and well. I think they're doing very well, and they did very good I would say, on the backs of our Indigenous traditional users. Louis Riel Sr., I'm sure you've read a little bit about Louis Riel. Louis Riel Sr., the father of Louis Riel Jr., was actually born in Île à Crosse, 1817. Sarah Riel, which Louis Riel's sister, she was a nun. She's actually buried in Île à Crosse. So, a little bit of history just around. In 1846, the missionary arrived in Île à Crosse, and we're about a population of about 1,400 people. So the history tells us like 1860s was our first mission school in Île à Crosse. So we've been around, and it just I would say the history, it was more the Catholic was there, the first mission school, then kind of it followed through with the, the government getting more involved. So this more a snapshot of the history of this, an Isle Cross, and I speak of Northwest communities because our residential school today is not recognized. And we had about 1,500 survivors come through our school. And there was half were Métis, half were First Nation. Today, there's a couple other survivors who are with me today. Margaret Ubashon, I think she's around. She's here. I hope she's here. And also Emile Janvier. They're survivors of Isle Cross Residential School. And we're still, like I said earlier, we're still fighting for a recognition. Very important. We want to be part of the gathering. We want to be part of your family. Very important that it becomes that. I'm a survivor of Isle Cross Residential School for 9 years. My parents were also survivors. And the agenda was the same, is to take the culture out of the child. I went in there, I was 5 years old. When you're 5 years old, you are a child. And you don't know what you're expecting. And my parents never spoke anything about residential school. Even, I think there was a lot of, the trauma was the same. We suffered the same trauma. We couldn't speak our language. We couldn't even use our name. I was given a number. A number. I still remember my number, and that's how they called you. A number. We couldn't speak because the boys stayed on one side and the girls had to stay on the other away, and we weren't allowed to go even visit our sisters. Like I said earlier, we had about 1,500 survivors. They came from all the surrounding Métis communities, First Nation communities, like all the way from Bouvel, Patronac, La Loche, Buffalo, Birch Narrows, Pine House, Green Lake, Buffalo River, Jans Bay. Those are small communities within the area of Isle Cross. And today, there's about 600 probably alive, about 600. And the age gap is around in the 50s to the 80s. So as Peter was saying, I guess we're the middle of the generational gap. And that's why it's very important that we look at the intergenerational of how we heal our communities and where we need to ask. Give us the tools we want to heal. We can do it ourselves. We've been doing it for 247 years. And the one thing I found is, I know my parents, what they related to is they went back into the land after they left school, the residential school. My late brother was the same. My late brother ran away from school, and he went onto the land. He trapped and fished. We've never taken a survey, I guess, in terms of how many went on to post-secondary as our survivors. We've never done that, but I think it would probably be really low numbers. People just wanted to go back to the land. And I can understand, I think, some of it and relate to it because of where people actually suffered the trauma. It was They just wanted to go somewhere and get away. And today, trapping and fishing is still big in culture. The strap. I'm just experienced. The strap was, and I'm sure people have seen it. That was their main weapon. We had to listen, and I remember little things like that, like even my best friend, he was ahead of me, we had to take our report cards to, and he failed grade 2. And he got a strap actually, for failing. Even experiences about some of the survivors wetting their beds. We had to sit around the boxes downstairs. They came through down, from where we slept upstairs, and they made them wear diapers, just like a fashion show. Is this some of the experience that we faced? It was just, it's the same as all the residential school. So, we lost our language, the culture, identity. It's just, and all we were asking for and are still asking is we want recognition. Our survivors want put closure to this file. When they say UN Convention that the rights of a child, I strongly believe that when we say that no child should be left behind, I agree with that no survivor should be left behind. That's why I think it's very important when we start talking that intergenerational stuff, that we are not educating our younger people enough in terms of residential school. My grandkids today still ask me, what is residential school? I try to explain as much as I can, but we need to find better ways of how we need to tell our story and tell them to our own people in our communities. The K-12 system, how do we tell a 2-year-old on a positive manner, not to say that they'll understand it as they get older, but I think it's very important to bring that education. The history has to, like my panel colleagues have said, is the history has to be told. Now we had a lot of support in terms of FSIN, Federated Sovereign Indigenous Nations of Saskatchewan. First Nations people actually made a resolution and supported us in terms of our fight for recognition. So, and the MNS leadership is very important. I think they've gave us a lot of support, and they're still continue to stand beside us today. But a lot of our people, even in our communities, even Nyla Cross, they're all half of our community of 1,400 people, is this maybe 500 are First Nations now. So we're family, is what I'm telling people. The Catholic, I know we're taking action now against government, but I think people have said, what about the Catholic? Yes, we've said, I've told them, yes, we need to also involve the Catholic in terms of how we do our healing process. They played a big role within our school, and they ran the school also where we stayed, and also the school system till 75. So they need to be part of the healing journey, if we so call it. If anything I can ask from the gathering is, and like I said earlier, we're family, we want to, that no survivor should be left behind. Support us in our fight. I think it's very important, as my colleagues have said, that we can go a long ways united. And that's what we've told government is, and whoever is, give us the tools. We want to heal ourselves. We have, all we need is the tools. Give us the tools. We've been around for, like I said earlier, with 247 years since 1776. Very important that, and our people have said that, our elders have said that, is, we need to heal ourselves. We know our people best. We know our kids understand. And our communities, that's why I'm saying the intergenerational, our communities they're suffering. One is that because of the language, the culture, I think we need to really, really educate them and build a good future for our generation as my grandkids. That's why I'm speaking today here on behalf of my grandkids and everybody's grandkids, the future. Because my survivors, my parents, my great-grandparents, all our survivors have allowed me to be their spokesperson now, to talk on their behalf. So, as we move down, I guess it's in terms of where do we go next and how do you get the tools? And like I said, I think it's very important that we do this united. Nimiuhtin, I speak my language lots, but the younger generation do not speak it. And we've been told, like, if we lose your language, their culture is at risk. So we need to really start building, and I think those are the impacts and effects that we all have in terms of the spokespeople that, how do we drive this? We're the drivers now, we have to give that message, and a lot of our survivors are tired, and we've been at this file for a lot of years. We actually just had a survivors gathering this past weekend in Saskatoon. We had about 400 people there, survivors, right just a mile across residential school. So we've been known to be fighters, not give up. It's just that we returned, my survivors, we returned home, I guess, but I think we were more lost than anything else because of the as a 5-year-old, going in there as a 5-year-old and told that you couldn't speak your language, you couldn't, you're going to follow our way. And so, things like that really affect you after, that you almost wonder about the doctrine of discovery. I think they bought into it. And I'm sure a lot of you people know the doctrine of discovery. So a lot of history, the Treaty 10 was signed in Isla Crosse. Treaty 10 was signed in Isla Crosse in 1906, so we're connected. And we planned a big celebration in 3 years, 250-year celebration. And we're going to do it all together, and the residential school is going to be a big part of our celebration. And we hope that we can hear some good news, and we want to invite everybody that's, to come and join us in the celebration. And I would say it's a celebration because then we need to start planning for the next 250 years, I guess. So in closing, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity and being part of your gathering. I think it's very important that, for you, for your group to allow us to present and speak about our residential school and our experience. So everything is the same. So marsin de tuan, waing miutin anusota, mute peyamian. And if you want information, we do have a website. It's United number 4, United4Survivors.ca, if people want to read up on it. So thank you very much, Marci, and for the opportunity. Thank you. Yeah.
Miigwech, thank you very much. Louis Gardner, Pita Ertuk, and Doug George. Thank you so much for your sharing. Let's give them a hand.